The aftermath. The silence after the battle was deafening. The Vigilant drifted through space, its hull battered and scorched from the Empire's relentless fire. The ship's shields were down, and the systems were barely holding together. But Thorn stood at the helm, looking out at the wreckage of the Empire's fleet. The flagship, once a symbol of their power, was now nothing but debris floating in the void. The other ships were scattered, their formations shattered. The Empire had lost its grip on the battle, and for the first time in a long while, it seemed like the tide had turned in humanity's favor. "We did it," Lucia said quietly, her voice filled with awe as she watched the destruction on the monitors. "We actually did it." Thorn didn't respond right away. His mind was still racing, calculating every move they had made, every shot they had taken. He knew the battle wasn't truly over, but they had struck a massive blow to the Empire. "Damage report?" Thorn asked, his voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. Lucia's fingers moved quickly over the controls. "Shields are down, and we've lost several systems. Engines are at 30%, Captain. We can't move fast, but we're still alive." "We'll make it back," Thorn said with confidence. "We've survived worse." As the crew took a moment to catch their breath, Thorn turned his attention to the larger picture. The Empire had just lost its flagship, and their fleet was in disarray. But that didn't mean they were finished. They would rebuild, regroup, and come after them again. Thorn knew that this victory was just the beginning. The Empire might have underestimated humanity, but now they had seen the power of a single human ship. The Vigilant had been the underdog, but against all odds, it had taken down one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. He looked at his crew, his family. They had done the impossible, and they had done it together. "Lucia," Thorn said, "send a message to the rest of the fleet. Tell them the Empire is not invincible. They can be beaten." Lucia nodded, already sending the message. "Message sent, Captain. I'll make sure it reaches every corner of the galaxy." Thorn took a deep breath. "We've shown them what humanity is capable of. And now, we take the fight to them." But even as he spoke, the weight of what lay ahead pressed on his shoulders. The Empire would come for them. But now, they knew humanity's strength. And Thorn wasn't about to let that strength fade. He turned to the crew. "Get some rest. We have a long road ahead of us. But we'll be ready. We'll never back down." As the Vigilant limped back toward their base, Thorn couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. But he knew one thing for certain. Humanity had just made its mark on the galaxy, and there was no turning back. The Empire would remember this day. The day a single human ship destroyed their most powerful fleet. And Thorn would make sure they never forgot it. "Direct hit, Captain," Lucia called. "They're losing ships, but they're regrouping. More ships are entering the fray." Thorn gritted his teeth. "We've got to keep them off balance. Lucia, target their rear fleet. We'll take out the backup ships." Lucia adjusted the targeting systems, locking onto the new targets. Locked on. Ready to fire. The Vigilant fired again, this time at the backup ships in the rear of the fleet. The blast hit one of the ships dead center, and the ship erupted into a fireball. The explosion sent shockwaves through the fleet, causing more confusion and chaos. For a moment, it seemed like the Empire's fleet was on the verge of losing control. Their ships were scattered, and their formations were breaking apart. But Thorn knew it wouldn't last. The Empire was quick to recover, and their ships were still much larger and more powerful than the Vigilant. "They're regrouping," Lucia said, her eyes glued to the screens. "They're adjusting their tactics. We're not out of danger yet." Thorn's mind raced. They had made a strong start, but the battle was far from over. The Empire would learn from this fight, and they would adapt quickly. "We need to take out their flagship," Thorn said, determination burning in his eyes. "If we destroy their command ship, we can cripple their fleet." Lucia's fingers flew over the controls, locking onto the massive flagship that had been directing the battle. "I've got a lock on the flagship. Ready to fire." Thorn's voice was calm, but full of resolve. "Make it count." The Vigilant fired again, sending a powerful blast toward the flagship. The shot hit the target, and for a moment, it looked like they had succeeded. But the flagship didn't explode. Instead, the massive ship fired back, unleashing a full barrage of weapons toward the Vigilant. The ship rocked violently as the enemy's attack struck its shields. The Vigilant's hull groaned under the pressure. The shields were nearly gone, and the ship's systems were starting to fail. "We've got to get out of here," Lucia yelled, panic creeping into her voice. But Thorn stood firm. "No, we're finishing this." With the Empire's flagship focused on them, the Vigilant had one final chance. Thorn's eyes locked onto the weak points in the flagship's defense. They could still make it through, but it would be a risk. "Lucia, full power to the engines. We're going in." With a final burst of speed, the Vigilant surged forward, heading straight for the flagship's exposed side. The enemy didn't expect the move, and Thorn saw an opening. It was a risk, but it was their best shot. "Now fire everything," Thorn shouted. The Vigilant unleashed everything it had: lasers, missiles, and energy blasts. The flagship's shields collapsed, and the barrage hit with devastating force. The massive ship groaned and shuddered, its systems failing. The Vigilant pulled away just in time as the flagship exploded in a blaze of light. The Empire's fleet fell into disarray as the flagship's destruction sent shockwaves through their ranks. The tide of the battle was shifting. Thorn stood tall, breathing heavily. The battle wasn't over, but they had just won a major victory. The battle begins. The tension in the cockpit was thick. Thorn could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The crew had prepared as best as they could, and now all that was left was to face the Empire's trap head-on. "Lucia, status on the enemy fleet?" Thorn asked, his voice steady but sharp with determination. Lucia's fingers moved rapidly over the console. "The enemy fleet is moving toward us. They have at least 20 ships, most of them heavily armed. They're closing in fast." Thorn glanced at the radar. The Empire had made their move. The ships were moving in a tight formation, seemingly confident that they would trap the Vigilant in the open space. "We'll have to break through their lines," Thorn said. "Ready the weapons. I want every laser and missile locked and loaded." "Weapon systems are online," Lucia confirmed. "We're good to go." The Vigilant's engines roared to life as the ship began to move, slowly at first, but then faster as Thorn pushed the throttle forward. The Empire's ships were closing in quickly, and there was no time to waste. The trap had already been set, but Thorn wasn't going to be the one caught. "On my mark, we make a run for it," Thorn said. "We're not going to stay here and fight them head-on. We'll use speed and precision. We'll hit them hard and fast." He could see the enemy ships now, their enormous forms filling the view screen. The dark shadows of the ships grew larger, and the feeling of dread intensified. The Empire was confident, but Thorn knew they were making a mistake. "Ready the first salvo," Thorn ordered, eyes narrowing. Lucia nodded, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Locked on, Captain. Ready to fire." "Now," Thorn shouted. The Vigilant's guns blazed, sending a barrage of energy blasts toward the enemy fleet. The first shot struck the closest enemy ship, causing a massive explosion that sent debris scattering into space. But the Empire didn't flinch. They responded immediately, opening fire with their own weapons. The Vigilant shook under the force of the impact, but the shields held for now. Lucia quickly adjusted the ship's course, dodging another barrage of laser fire. "Shields holding at 45%, Captain," Lucia said, her voice tight with focus. "We can't take too many more hits like that." "We don't plan to," Thorn muttered, his eyes scanning the enemy fleet. He could see the weakness in their formation. The ships were too clustered together, and their large size made them less agile. Thorn knew that if they could break through the first line, they could cause chaos in their ranks. "Lucia, increase speed," Thorn ordered. We're going straight for the heart of their formation. The Vigilant surged forward, dodging more enemy fire as it rocketed toward the center of the fleet. The enemy was firing wildly, trying to adjust their targeting, but Thorn was too fast. The ship darted through the gaps between two enemy ships, its speed and precision allowing it to avoid direct hits. "Keep the pressure on," Thorn shouted. The Vigilant fired again, hitting a second enemy ship. This time, the blast took out the enemy's main engine, and the ship exploded, disintegrating into a cloud of wreckage. Thorn tightened his grip on the controls. His eyes never left the screen, watching the drones and the asteroid field. The gap was small, but if they could make it through, they'd be able to escape the drones for a while. The real question was whether they would survive the journey. "Now," Thorn shouted. The Vigilant surged forward with all the speed the engines could muster. The gap between the drones was closing quickly, but Thorn had timed it perfectly. The ship shot forward, darting through the narrow opening between two massive asteroids. The drones followed closely behind, but the tight spaces of the field slowed them down. The Vigilant was out of the worst danger for the moment, but the battle was far from over. The drones were still close, and the Vigilant's engines were beginning to overheat from the intense burst of speed. "Captain," Lucia said, "we are at critical engine temperatures. We need to slow down, or we risk damaging the ship." Thorn's mind raced. They couldn't stop now. The drones were still hot on their tail. They needed a plan, and fast. "Lucia, plot a course for the nearest moon," Thorn ordered. "We'll hide there, make them think we're done." "You want to take us to the moon?" Lucia asked, sounding surprised. "It's a risky move, Captain." "We don't have a choice," Thorn replied. "We'll use its surface to hide from their sensors." The Vigilant banked hard to the right, racing toward the dark side of a small moon nearby. The drones were still coming, but the Vigilant had gained enough distance to enter the shadow of the moon and disappear from their sensors. Thorn watched the monitor carefully as they neared the moon's surface. The drones were closing in, but they were not yet in range to attack. "Lucia, is there a cave or tunnel on the surface we can enter?" Thorn asked. "Yes," Lucia responded. "I found one. It's large enough to fit the Vigilant, but we must be careful. It's not well mapped." "Take us in," Thorn ordered. "We're going in." With a final burst of speed, the Vigilant dived into the moon's shadow, heading straight for the entrance of the cave. The drones followed, but the cave's entrance was narrow, and their larger ships wouldn't be able to follow them inside. As the Vigilant disappeared into the darkness of the cave, Thorn let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. For now, they were safe, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The Empire would keep searching, and sooner or later, they'd find them, trapped in the asteroid field. The Vigilant shook as the ship raced through the asteroid field. Rocks and debris flew past at terrifying speeds. Thorn gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white. The drones followed closely behind, their sensors locked on the Vigilant. They were relentless. "Lucia, how long before they catch up to us?" Thorn asked, trying to focus on navigating through the maze of asteroids. "Approximately 2 minutes, Captain," Lucia replied. "Their tracking systems are adapting quickly. We can't outrun them for long." Thorn's heart raced. The asteroid field had been their hope. Its chaos and constant movement were supposed to make it harder for the drones to keep up. But the Empire's technology was advanced. It wouldn't be long before they found a way to track them through the field. "Prepare the ship for evasive maneuvers," Thorn ordered. "We can't let them get too close." The Vigilant shifted again, ducking and weaving between the asteroids, narrowly avoiding large rocks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Thorn's mind raced. He couldn't keep this up forever. They needed to do something more. A loud beep suddenly echoed through the cockpit. "Captain, incoming fire," Lucia warned. "The drones are charging their weapons." The first blast hit the Vigilant's shields, shaking the ship violently. Thorn's teeth clenched as the ship jerked under the impact. "Status on the shields," Thorn demanded. "Shields are holding for now," Lucia replied. but they're weakening. We'll need to act fast. Thorne glanced at the flashing lights on the control panel, then back at the screen showing the asteroid field. He could hear the hum of the ship's engines as they pushed harder, faster. But the drones weren't slowing down. In fact, they were closing in. The Vigilant's speed alone wouldn't be enough to keep them safe for much longer. "Lucia, can we trigger the defensive drones?" Thorne asked. The ship had small, automated defense drones that could be deployed in situations like this, but using them was risky. They didn't have a lot of them, and they would only work if they could be deployed quickly and accurately. "Activating defensive drones now," Lucia replied. Within moments, tiny ships shot out from the Vigilant, darting into the field to engage the enemy drones. The first wave of defensive drones collided with the Empire's fleet, creating explosions and sending debris flying. For a moment, the enemy drones were distracted, but it wasn't enough. The rest of the Imperial drones quickly regrouped and adjusted their targeting systems. "They're adapting," Thorne muttered under his breath. "We need to outsmart them." Another blast shook the ship. The shields were barely holding now, flickering with each hit. The Vigilant was taking damage, and every second counted. "Lucia, can you find a weak spot in their formation?" Thorne asked, eyes scanning the chaos outside. "I'm scanning now," Lucia replied. "There's a slight gap in the drone's positions, but it's narrow. It will be hard to slip through." "We'll take it," Thorne said, determination in his voice. "Prepare the engines for a burst of speed. We're going through that gap." Lucia didn't waste a second. Engines primed and ready. "Full power on your mark." The Vigilant's engines hummed as it shifted positions, trying to stay out of the line of fire. The enemy ships were now actively searching for them, scanning the area where the Vigilant had been hiding just moments ago. They were blind, but that wouldn't last long. Soon, the enemy would track them down, and the real battle would begin. "Status on the cloak?" Thorne asked, watching the seconds tick by. "We have 1 minute left, Captain," Lucia responded. "The energy is nearly drained. We'll need to recharge if we want to remain undetected." Thorne thought fast. They couldn't afford to be seen. If the Vigilant was exposed now, the Empire's ships would tear them apart in seconds. Re-engage the cloak for 30 more seconds, then prepare for evasive maneuvers, Thorne ordered. "We need to get to a safer position." The ship's systems hummed again as the cloaking device activated for the last time. The Vigilant vanished once more into the shadows of space, leaving the Empire's fleet searching blindly. A moment later, the Vigilant shifted course, veering sharply to the left, away from the enemy's search patterns. Thorne watched the monitors closely, calculating the best path to take. But then, a sudden alert broke through his thoughts. "Captain, incoming drones," Lucia warned. "They've launched a counterattack." Thorne cursed under his breath. The Empire wasn't going to let them get away so easily. The drones were fast, and they had tracking systems that could follow even the most advanced cloaking tech. The Vigilant was running out of time. "Prepare for evasive action," Thorne said, his voice sharp. "Lucia, can we fight them off?" "We can try," Lucia responded, "but we don't have enough firepower to take them all down." The drones were closing in quickly, their small, sleek forms darting through space with deadly precision. They would be upon them in seconds. Thorne's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the drones. They couldn't fight them off without exposing the ship. There was only one option left. "Lucia," Thorne said, his voice low, "set course for the asteroid field. We're going to make them chase us." Lucia paused for a brief moment before replying. "A risky move, Captain. But it may give us the time we need." Thorne nodded. It was their best shot. The Vigilant turned sharply toward the nearby asteroid field, the small rocks and debris floating silently in the vast emptiness of space. The drones would follow them in. There was no other choice for the Empire. As the ship entered the field, the Vigilant's engines roared to life, dodging asteroids and weaving through the dangerous field of debris. The drones, relentless in their pursuit, followed without hesitation. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The calm had returned, but it was only temporary. The real battle was just beginning. The unexpected first strike. Captain Thorne stood still, watching the stars outside the vigilance window. His hands were tight around the armrests of his chair, his mind racing. The Empire's fleet was still reeling from the sudden strike. The vigilance cloaking system had given them a chance, but that advantage was quickly running out. The cloaking field was draining power fast, and soon they would be visible to the enemy again. "Lucia," Thorne said, his voice calm despite the rising tension. "How long can we keep the cloak active?" "The energy reserves are at 47%, Captain," Lucia replied. "We can hold the cloak for another 3 minutes, but after that, we'll need to power down." Thorne glanced at the monitor in front of him. The Empire's fleet was in disarray, but they weren't panicking. They were regrouping. Soon, they would be ready to attack again, and the Vigilant would have to fight without its greatest advantage. "Understood," Thorne said. He knew the time to strike was now, before the enemy could reorganize. "Let's make those 3 minutes count. Prepare to launch another attack." Lucia's voice came through, smooth and confident. "Weapons charged, Captain. The next pulse will be aimed directly at their lead command ship." The Vigilance weapons hummed to life. Thorne felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was the moment that could decide everything. If they failed, they wouldn't get another chance. "Lucia, fire on my mark," Thorne said. The Empire's ships were still moving, their sensors scanning the darkness for any sign of the Vigilant. They were getting closer now. The enemy flagship loomed in the distance, its massive shape cutting through the blackness of space. It was the heart of the Empire's fleet, and if they could take it down, the entire fleet would lose its nerve. Thorne's eyes narrowed as he studied the approaching ships. He could see them now, even without the cloaking system. They were still disoriented, but that wouldn't last long. They had to move fast. "Now!" Thorne shouted. Without hesitation, the Vigilant fired. The bright beam of energy shot out of the ship's cannons, cutting through space and toward the enemy flagship. It was a direct hit. The flagship trembled as the energy pulse struck its engines, sending a shockwave of light through the surrounding fleet. The enemy ships immediately went on high alert. "Direct hit on the flagship," one of the Imperial officers yelled. "They found us." "Lucia, can we disable their weapons?" Thorne asked quickly, watching the chaos unfold on the screen. "I'm targeting their weapon systems now, Captain," Lucia replied, her tone cool despite the tension. "In 30 seconds, their weapons will be offline." Thorne gripped the armrests harder. This was the break they needed, but it wouldn't last long. The Empire's fleet was recovering, and they were far from done with the Vigilant. Thorne could feel the pressure building. They had made their move, but now they had to survive. The Vigilant's systems hummed to life, the weapons charging with intense energy. The small ship's weapon systems, though outdated, were powerful enough when used strategically. They would have to make every shot count. The drones, unaware of the Vigilant's presence, flew directly into their path. Thorne could see the small enemy vessels approaching, swarming like angry insects. The Empire's tactics were predictable. They sent their drones first to wear down the target, testing the enemy's defenses. They had no idea that the Vigilant was hiding, waiting for the perfect moment. "Now, Lucia," Thorne ordered. With a smooth click of a button, the Vigilant unleashed a precise, devastating energy pulse. The first wave of drones disintegrated in a flash of light, their debris scattering in all directions. The Empire's fleet had no idea what hit them. They were blind, unable to see the Vigilant hidden in plain sight. The first wave of drones was destroyed, but more were on the way. Thorne knew they couldn't keep the cloak up forever. The Vigilant was running low on power, and the cloaking field drained the energy quickly. It wouldn't take long before the Empire's fleet would detect them. "We've got to make this count, Lucia," Thorne said, his voice cold. Lock onto their flagship. We need to hit them hard. The Vigilant moved swiftly, positioning itself behind the enemy's lead ship. The cloaking system kept them hidden from the Empire's sensors as they closed in on the flagship. Locked on, Captain, Lucia said. Energy pulse is at full power. Shall I fire? Thorn took a deep breath. This was it. They couldn't afford to miss. He nodded. Fire. A bright, searing beam of energy shot out from the Vigilant's hidden weapons system, tearing through the air toward the Empire's flagship. The blast was precise, hitting the flagship's weak point, its communication hub. Sparks erupted from the ship as the pulse hit its target, and for a moment, the flagship seemed to shudder, unable to respond. The Empire's fleet, now thrown into confusion, scrambled to find the source of the attack. But Thorn wasn't finished yet. Lucia, prepare for another strike. This time, we take out their engines. The Empire was in disarray, trying to reorganize after the unexpected strike. The Vigilant had created chaos in their ranks, but they had to act quickly before the Empire could react. The small ship with its powerful secrets had thrown the Empire off balance. But it was only a matter of time before the enemy would regroup and strike back. We don't have much time, Thorn said, his voice firm. Ready the next strike. The hidden power of the Vigilant. Captain Thorn stood at the helm of the Vigilant, staring at the approaching fleet on the screen. The ships were massive, too big for their small vessel to defeat head-on. But Thorn had something the Empire didn't know about. The Vigilant wasn't just another old ship drifting through space. It had a secret, one that had been carefully kept from the eyes of the Empire for years. Lucia, the ship's AI, spoke in a calm voice. Captain, I'm detecting multiple Empire fleet signatures closing in on our position. They are preparing to launch attack drones. Can you calculate their trajectory? Thorn asked, his voice tight with concentration. I'm already working on it, Lucia replied. They'll be within range in 5 minutes. The drones will strike first, followed by the main fleet. Thorn's mind raced. The Vigilant was equipped with outdated weapons. Its shields were not powerful enough to withstand a full Empire assault. But there was one thing the Empire didn't know: the ship's hidden weapon, one that had been kept secret even from its own crew until now. Lucia, Thorn said, lowering his voice, it's time. Activating hidden systems now, she responded. The ship's interior lights flickered for a moment, and a soft hum filled the air. It wasn't much of a sound, but to Thorn, it was like a signal, an alarm that the calm was over and the fight had begun. The Vigilant wasn't just any ship. It had an advanced cloaking system, a rare and top-secret technology that the Empire had no idea existed. It was a gift from a mysterious ally, a technology so powerful that it could render the ship almost invisible to enemy sensors. Ready, Captain, Lucia confirmed. Cloaking field activated. Outside, the enemy fleet was growing closer. The Vigilant could hear the soft rumble of the incoming drone strike, but now it was no longer visible on the enemy scanners. The Vigilant had disappeared into the stars, like a shadow in the dark. Thorn's heart pounded. They couldn't fight the Empire with strength alone, not with one ship against so many. But they could use their hidden advantages. The cloaking system would give them the element of surprise, at least for a while. Lucia, are we in range of the drones? Thorn asked, his voice steady despite the pressure. We're close, Captain. 5 seconds until they're within strike range. Thorn's eyes narrowed. Prepare a full barrage of energy pulses. We can't let them detect us yet. Send a distress signal to the nearest neutral systems, Thorn ordered, and prepare the crew. We may be facing a fight we can't win. His heart sank as the thought crossed his mind. Could the Empire have found them already? Had their cover been blown? He had been running from the Empire for years now, ever since the Vigilant was assigned to its secret mission. A mission that no one in the galaxy knew about. A mission that could change everything. And now, it looked like the Vigilant had run out of time. Captain, we have approximately 10 minutes before they reach our position, Lucia informed him. The fleet is closing in fast. Thorn nodded grimly. Prepare the crew for action. We may have to fight. The crew, scattered across the ship, went into action. There was no time for panic. They had been trained for moments like this. The ship's doors slid open, and soldiers and technicians moved quickly to their stations. The crew knew the odds were slim, but they were ready. If the Empire wanted to take them down, they would make them fight for it. As the crew scrambled, Thorn made his way to the bridge. His mind raced with possibilities. He had heard stories of the Empire's power, of fleets that could destroy entire planets with a single command. But he had also heard of their arrogance. They underestimated smaller forces like the Vigilant. It was the only advantage they had. The Empire's pride was its greatest weakness. The captain knew they could use that to their benefit. The stars outside the Vigilance window began to blur as the enemy ships came into view. They were massive, easily 5 times the size of the Vigilant. The ships had sleek, dark hulls that seemed to absorb the light around them, making them look like shadows in the night sky. Their energy signatures pulsed with dangerous power. The captain could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't going to be easy. The Vigilant wasn't designed for full-on combat, but it had something else that most ships didn't: its ability to think quickly, adapt, and strike fast. It wasn't about size. It was about using the environment, the surprise, and their wits. Thorn knew that if they were going to survive, they would need to outsmart the Empire at every turn. They couldn't afford a head-on battle. "Lucia, what's our status?" Thorn asked, his voice steady. "We're ready, Captain," Lucia responded. "Weapons are armed, and shields are at maximum. However, the energy reserves are limited. We can't afford to waste shots." Thorn nodded. It was all they had. They would have to make every shot count. The Imperial fleet was getting closer. Thorn could hear the hum of the Vigilance engines as it prepared to face the enemy head-on. It was a gamble, but it was the only choice they had. The calm before the storm was over. The fight for survival had begun. The calm before the storm. The Vigilant drifted silently through the endless black of space. It was a small, unremarkable ship by galactic standards. Its hull scratched and faded from years of service. The ship's engines hummed softly as it glided through the empty reaches of the universe, far from any major planets or star systems. The crew inside was used to the quiet. After all, they had been on this mission for months, moving through unknown space with no clear destination. Captain Thorn stood by the window of the command deck, looking out at the stars. His eyes were sharp, constantly scanning the dark void for anything unusual. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts. But today, something felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but the calm was unsettling. The space around them was eerily silent, almost as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Captain, there's something on the scanners," came the voice of Lucia, the ship's eye. She was a calm and collected presence, always ready with information when needed. "I'm detecting multiple ships moving in from the outer edge of the system." Thorn turned quickly, his heart racing for a moment. He had been expecting something like this. He had been expecting it for days, but he hadn't thought it would come this soon. "Any identification on the ships?" Thorn asked, his voice steady but tense. Lucia ran a quick scan. "No specific match, Captain, but the size and energy signatures are consistent with Imperial fleet vessels." The captain's face hardened. The Galactic Empire's fleet was vast, advanced, and ruthless. They were the last thing he wanted to encounter out here in the fringe of the galaxy. He looked down at the map displayed on the console. There was no way they could escape if it was indeed the Empire. There was nowhere to run. "Are we sure?" Thorn asked, his voice lowering. "We're far from any known Empire territory." "I'm certain, Captain," Lucia replied. "The Empire's ships are massive and highly advanced. I've never seen this much energy concentrated in such a small area." Thorn clenched his fists. The Vigilant was no match for a full Imperial fleet. Its weapons were outdated, its shields weakened by years of use. It had been built for reconnaissance and simple skirmishes, not for full-scale battle. But they couldn't afford to panic. Not now.